All right. Here we go. Welcome to Awesemo.com's College Football Live Before Lock Championship Weekend. Matt, we have made it. We are through the regular season. We've got 8 fantastic games today, going to determine the college football playoff. One of the best college football days of the year. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited. I love these games. They're all really competitive outside of maybe the Michigan-Iowa game, but we're going to dive into it all. But yeah, super pumped.
Yeah, we got a couple appetizers last night. Western Kentucky, not good. Utah, honestly, is one of the 4 best teams in the country. Not saying they should get in the playoffs, but I wouldn't want to play them right now. But we've got plenty of time. We're going to dive into it. It's good to see everyone in chat. And where we're going to get things started is where we always do. Our friends at PrizePicks, who sponsor this show, daily prop-based contests over there. And if you haven't been over there, no better time. Even though the season's winding down, they've got all the other sports available. And you should really check out that format. What you're going to be doing, you're picking 2, 3, 4, or 5 players, and you're just going to project over-unders, just like you do in the betting markets. They have all different types of categories: passing yards, rushing TDs, receptions, really anything that you guys would be interested in. They have, and they've just got so many lines out there. They're also offering a fantastic deposit bonus of up to $100 with the promo code Awesemo. Matt, today's board, I know in our premium Discord, you dropped a bunch of prize picks in there already. Couple that I wanted to ask you about was Jaylen Warren's rushing yards. That's a guy that when healthy, he gets massive amount of work, as well as Dustin Crum's rushing yards, the QB for Kent State. And as Tyler just put on the screen, 25% payout boost on all CFB entries. So you're getting even more bang for your buck. But were those 2 or any others stood out for you today on prize picks?
Warren's a great one. He's one I still like. When we have our premium Discord, so I've just been trying to put the picks in there ahead of time, so the lines don't move on people. But you could have found this at 86.5 as early as Thursday. I'm not sure when PrizePicks drops them, but that's when I first looked. Now it's up to 91.5. I am still okay with that number, actually. I think it should be a little bit higher. For Warren, he's a guy that has handled a massive workload this year. He had 4 straight games of over 30 touches, kind of towards the midpoint of the year. And then they hit a lull in their schedule where they played Kansas. So they took their foot off the gas with Warren a little bit. He was banged up 2 weeks ago, but last week he returned and he out-touched Dominic Richardson 18-1, suggesting to me that he could be in line for that monstrous workload in a winner-take-all format here.
No doubt. I mean, I don't think it's because they played Baylor, but the first time they played Baylor, he had 36 carries. And if he even comes remotely close to that type of volume, he will be clearing this 91.5 with ease. Talk to me real quickly before we dive into the games about Dustin Crum, who is a quarterback for Kent State. He wasn't active on the ground in the last game, but overall, this guy has legit 100-yard upside at times.
Yeah, he's going to be a little bit volatile at times because he plays the quarterback position and they do have such good rushers. But over the course of his career and the longer body of work that we have with him this season, he projects over 42.5 rushing yards. So this is a little more volatile in my opinion than Warren, but I'm still comfortable playing it.
It's going to be a great game. I cannot wait to dive into that one. Before we do that, though, we're going to start with the first game, and it is the Oklahoma State Baylor game. Right before, literally minutes before we went on, I looked and the Baylor game went off the board, and I was wondering what happened. And it looks like their quarterback is not going to play. So first things first here, what does that mean if Bohannon is not playing? Who do they go to, and how much does this affect Baylor's offense? They are now down to a 7-point underdog.
I saw this immediately, so I was maybe thinking about betting it, but ultimately it was already at 6.5. So I didn't view like the half point or the point that I think this is going to move as super impactful. They don't use Bohannon a lot anyway. He's a game manager who is mobile. And I think the fact that they are switching quarterbacks does mean something, but my question is how much for a team that does not want to throw the ball. They're extremely run heavy and they're extremely slow. We actually saw a little bit of productivity out of Blake Shapen, who's going to be the starter again here. Not much, and they were playing Texas Tech, so take this for what it's worth, but he completed 59% of his passes for 254 yards. That's about 7.5 yards per attempt, which is a drop in efficiency from Bohannon, but not a stark drop. You could adjust this to opponents and say Texas Tech, maybe they're a weaker opponent and Chapin could struggle. But again, I don't think we were really that interested in playing Bohannon DFS anyway today. He would need significant negative game script to see elevated pass attempts. So I don't see this as being a major shift for DFS. And even the betting markets, I would have only taken this inside a touchdown. And even there, it was a little risky, I think.
Yeah, it didn't do much for me. I guess the one thing I wanted to ask you, and we don't have a huge sample size, this guy looks somewhat mobile. Is it possible that he could do some things on the ground that could cause problems and possibly rack up some points that way?
Yeah, he is mobile, but they run so many designed runs that's the issue. And Bohannon's mobile too. Like we've talked about Bohannon as kind of a game manager plus because of his mobility, but they just run so much with the running back position. It's not like they're dropping back to pass and these guys get a lot of opportunities to scramble. Their run rate is really high. So they're both kind of occupying this game manager overall sort of role. And Shappen, I think, might even be a little worse than Bohannon. And again, really small sample here, so we don't really know definitively, but he was not recruited as a dual threat. So I often just look at the recruiting services and they're not always right. Like Bryce Young was recruited as a dual threat and some other pro style quarterbacks actually have pretty decent mobility. But for what it's worth, Shappen was not recruited for his running ability.
What does this do to Abram Smith? What does this do to Thornton on the outside? I mean, are you altering basically what you're doing with Baylor? Or are you going to say this is a team I probably had little interest in to begin with at a 45.5 point total? I'm not going to drastically update anything because of this news.
I didn't have a ton of interest here. I'll tell you, most of my exposure to Baylor is coming through Abram Smith. He's been wildly efficient this year. In the first game, he went over 100 yards on just 9 carries. And since then, he's kind of emerged as the 1A to Tristan Ebner, 1B in this backfield. Abram Smith has at least 20 carries in 3 straight games. And there is a little bit of concern with volume here as touchdown underdogs. They do use Tristan Ebner as the preferred pass catching back. So there's a chance he's phased out of the game. But ultimately, this is still projected to be close. And when they do run the ball, Abram Smith gives them the best opportunity. So I have a decent amount of him. A tiny bit of Tyquan Thornton. And the issue with Thornton is they really need negative game script to coax a ceiling out of him. He has a 30% target share, but he only averages 7.3 targets per game, 70 receiving yards per game. He's between 7 and 8 targets in each of the last 4 games. So there's just no ceiling for him unless they get down in the game. And if they're down in the game, that means they probably dealt with inefficiency to start. So Thornton's not even my favorite play there. I think maybe you could use like some Drew Estrada. The one thing I'll say is this game's on the showdown slate, the very first showdown. So I think if you're punting, you're probably using guys like Drew Estrada, Ben Sims, and then trying to get up to an Abram Smith.
On the other side, we know Oklahoma State's got a very, very good defense. And we talked about Jaylen Warren. At times, he is a true bell cow in the backfield. Where does he fall? He's 6,600 on DK, 82 on FanDuel. And then talk about Sanders and Tay Martin, who is emerging kind of as an alpha lately.
Tay Martin has seen a lot of work. I think the quarterback news doesn't bode well for some of these pass catchers. Oklahoma State also takes a very run-heavy approach. The difference is Tay Martin has a little bit more volume because Oklahoma State actually plays fast. They're running 75.5 plays per game. So it just leads to more overall play volume, both for Jaylen Warren in the run game and these receivers in the pass game. So Tay Martin, he has a 29% target share, but he's averaging 1 full target above Tyquan Thornton, even with 1% less of a target share. So I think he's still risky. You can get guys like Devin Tompkins at the same price. You can pay up a little bit for Addison. So I wouldn't say Tay Martin's a preferred play in this environment, but you could certainly punt. A lot of these receivers that were hurt at the midpoint of the year are now healthy. So like a Jaden Bray has 7 targets over the last 2 games, or Blaine Green has 10 targets over the last 2 games. These guys are punt options in a pretty bad game environment, but they're certainly in play.
And then just for Warren, I mean, clearly he's in play. Is he cash viable for you? Where does he fall in the running back ranks?
Yeah, you can definitely play Warren in cash. It's a tight slate on DraftKings, so you have to make some concessions and decide whether you're willing to sacrifice maybe one of the QBs, a Jordan Addison type stud receiver, or one of the stud backs. I think Warren's a priority.
We did have a super chat, and it's a good question from Scarecrow. Appreciate that. The criteria for pass catching running backs to use in a QB stack, is it targets or receptions or something else? I'll just say this. Obviously, you want targets, but the one difference between this and NFL, and you've brought this to my attention all the way going back to last year, there are certain teams that score so much. You can take the running back, even though they don't catch a ton, and just try to consolidate or capture all the offense. If a team scores 50 points a game, you can get there even if the quarterback isn't connecting with the running back. So is there anything that I'm missing there? What do you look for when you're possibly pairing a running back with one of your QBs?
No, that's well said. Either they're a pass catching back or they're a part of a very high scoring offense.
And we're going to have 2 of those in this next game. Kent State, 3.5 point favorite versus Northern Iowa. 75.5 point total. The game is indoors. It's going to be like the game yesterday where Western Kentucky and UTSA just couldn't stop each other. Let's start with Dustin Crum. He's 10,700 on FanDuel, 8,300 on DraftKings. I assume he's still firmly in play, even though he is one of the, premier options.
Yeah, much more palatable on DraftKings, where you're dealing with Hartman and Pickett way at the top, and then you save a bunch of money by going down to Crum, even though he's still at 8.3. But Crum, we talked about the mobility to start the show. He is very mobile, 565 rushing yards on the year. He's part of one of the fastest offenses in the country. They're running 78.5 plays per game. Not very pass heavy, just a 42% pass rate, but that doesn't affect Crum as much because he is such a focal point in the run game, which is very important here. He's also easy to stack. You have Dante Cephas as a contrarian alpha because people are going to be going to Jordan Addison and Devin Tompkins at the top and Jacare Roberson. You have mid-priced options like Keyshawn Abram, and then you have cheap punts like Jayshawn Polk and Nykeem Johnson. And this team is 4 wide on most plays. So these guys are a lot more targeted than your Jaden Brays or Blaine Greens of the world. And that's why the Oklahoma State punt receivers are just GPP plays when you could get to some of the Polks and Johnsons in cash game formats because they do have a solid target floor at their prices. I think you can stack any and all 4 of them with Crum.
Yeah, we just had a question about some pay down options. And I think some of these receivers for a Kent State team that there's plenty of volume to go around can fit that criteria. What about Marcus Cooper in the backfield? I assume that he's also in play if you want to go a different direction.
Yeah, he's an amazing price adjusted play today. I think he's certainly cash viable. He's 100 cheaper than Jaylen Warren. The only issue is that he doesn't play as much in the pass game, and he will cede a little bit of work to Xavier Williams, but ultimately that doesn't matter because Kent State is so fast that Marcus Cooper is still averaging 19 touches per game, and he's been over 21 carries. When you include targets, he's been over 22 touches in each of the last 4 games. Northern Illinois is one of the worst run defenses in the country, allowing 226 yards per game. Crum, Cooper, and Xavier Williams can all exploit that. I think Cooper is a strong cash consideration, and Xavier Williams is viable in tournaments on low volume, but should see high efficiency.
On the other side, I mean, we know Northern Illinois is going to have to score to keep up. In the last game, Rocky Lombardi did not play. You kind of hypothesized, and I totally agree that, they were in this game regardless. We expect to see him. What about Cole Tucker on the outside? Talk to me about this Northern Illinois team. How do they attack? Because Kent State's defense is equally horrendous.
So I'm really curious to see how the beat writer situation looks for Northern Illinois today, because it's normally non-existent. We didn't even get this news till right up until lock. So I don't know who's the beat writer, but they don't really have a pulse. Hopefully with national coverage, somebody's paying attention to warmups right now. But Lombardi, that was my hypothesis. I don't know whether he's going to play or not. You're just going to have to watch warmups. They do not update injuries at all for Northern Illinois. Last week, they listed Cole Tucker as a starter and a captain, and he didn't play. No idea. I would assume Cole Tucker and Lombardi get up for this game because of the magnitude, but at the end of the day, I have no idea. Operating from the assumption that they're in, Rocky Lombardi is very, very volatile. He's been pretty mobile, but most of that has come in 3 or 4 games where he's been over 70 yards. And the rest of them, he's below 30. So just a ton of volatility there. He doesn't often look to run, and he's not used to his designed run usage is way up and down. In his 3 most recent games, he had 8, 1, and 7 designed runs. So it seems very matchup specific for Lombardi. And the same thing goes with his passing yards. He only averages 210 per game, but he has these massive spike weeks. And then these weeks where he's just completely non-existent. Looking at Kent State's defense, I think it's more likely than not that you see a better performance from Lombardi, but he's a lot riskier than some of the other stud quarterbacks on the slate. Without Tyrese Ritchie, you're basically only stacking with 2 players. It's Trayvon Rudolph and Cole Tucker. Tucker is a way better price adjusted play, but we know the issue with Cole Tucker. It's injury. Assuming he plays, he's easily the best price adjusted play in the offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things, as you mentioned, it is an early game, so maybe we'll get clarification. But I would expect to see Lombardi out there and some of these guys in the backfield. So this one dude, he hasn't played in weeks. Waylay. I assume it's Ducker back there. How do you break down the rushing attack before we move on?
All we know about Whaley's injury is that it's an arm injury and he hasn't played since week 5. No idea if I don't even know if he's been on the sidelines. There's just no semblance of coverage for Northern Illinois. But Ducker has been kind of a feature back at times. He does cede a lot of work to Clint Ratkovich. Even Ontario Brown, who was injured for a stretch of the year, is back. So if we just look at what the carries looked like last week, Ducker 13, and then Ratkovich and Ontario combined for 9. And the biggest issue with Ducker is he's not involved in the pass game. They will use Clint Ratkovich in this capacity. So if this plays to the spread at 3.5, Ducker could be phased out of the game pretty quickly. It's very volatile because Kent State is also poor in run defense. They're allowing 190 yards per game. So even if Northern Illinois gets the opening kick and scores first, Ducker has a massive ceiling. But similar to Lombardi, he's just very volatile because he doesn't catch passes.
Do you have any interest in having like a mega stack where you have Crum and Lombardi together?
Yeah, I have those lineups. They're stacks of the game entirely. And from the super chat earlier, I'm okay playing Crum with Cooper in the same lineup. I'm okay playing Lombardi and Ducker in the same lineup. Part of that consideration comes down to price too. And Crum and Lombardi are somewhat expensive, but Cooper and Ducker are cheap. So I don't think it affects your lineup too much if you want to just full game stack.
Before we move on, we did have an interesting 2v2. I like all these guys, so it's very close. We had an Ebner and Cephas versus Warren and Abram. So a Kent State pass catcher, and then Ebner or Warren.
Can you repeat the 2v2?
Sorry, yeah, I probably said that in like hieroglyphics. Ebner and Cephas or Warren and Abram.
I would rather play Warren and Abram.
As would I. Warren, to me, just kind of stands out there. We both are Kent State backers from the beginning of the year. Anything on the betting side, we both have the futures ticket. I think they win. I hope they just outscore them. That's the only way they play.
I agree. I think they're built for that, and Northern Illinois has faltered at times. The edges are with Kent State. I have them minus, I believe it's 2.5 here before it moved, and then holding the future 10-1 to win the MAC.
Damn right. All right. Third game on the slate. And we got a lot of people in here. Last college football of the before bowl season. If you guys can hit that like button, I will say for people who are just joining us, maybe got into this show late, if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We want you as part of the team. Obviously, me and Matt aren't going anywhere. College basketball bowl season, plenty here, in addition to everything else we do, and the Awesemo Odds channel, which is more betting focused. But glad to have you guys stopping in on this beautiful Saturday. Utah State, 6-point dogs. San Diego State, 49.5-point total. This is one of the games, not a ton of interest out there, but sometimes those are the games that can be sneaky. And I guess that's what I'm asking you here. You know, you've got Tompkins, who's a true alpha on the outside for this team, Tyler in the backfield. What do you think about Utah State going against a pretty respectable defense in San Diego State?
Utah State plays with the kind of offense we typically want to target. Very fast, balanced in terms of pass rate, but overall the extra volume leads to productivity, not just for the quarterback, but runners and receivers. The issue is they're playing against an extremely slow San Diego State team, an extremely defensively sound team. So you should see depressed play volume for Utah State. And then when we break this down for DFS, Bonner comes in pretty expensive. He's only $400 cheaper than Crum. It's easy to just get up to Crum in a 1v1 there. But if you want to stack him for the sake of contrarian appeal, San Diego State has struggled with teams that play like Utah State at times. Nevada gave them a run for their money, and that wasn't a high-scoring environment, but the game was close. Devin Tompkins has one of the best roles in college football. He's averaging 130 yards per game. He's been averaging 11.5 targets per game, and now he's priced down on DraftKings because of the matchup. I think at his price, he's viable. I would still rather play like a Roberson or something a little bit cheaper, but Tompkins a good GPP play at that price. The rest of them just don't have enough volume for their prices. McGriff at 3.5 sees about 4.8 targets per game, but he's very low in terms of yardage. He's used as just an underneath receiver. And then your downfield threats, Derek Wright and Brandon Bowling, they're a little bit more volatile in terms of like their targets and yardage. But overall, I think they're a bit expensive for their roles. Like Derek Wright at 6K, I would rather just find the extra salary to go to Roberson. So it's kind of just Tompkins or bust. In the backfield, they do kind of take the foot off the gas with their runners when they're ahead. And that was the case in their most recent game against New Mexico. They won by like 28 points. So you only saw Tyler carry 10 times. But when games are competitive, he will draw the lead back role over Elia Noah and John Gentry. So in contrarian lineups, Calvin Tyler's somewhat interesting, but he's on the fringes.
So, but you sum that up nicely. Does that mean some of the parts that you don't have a ton of interest in Bonner himself?
I don't have a lot of interest in Bonner, no. He's not mobile. He's going to suffer in a tough matchup with less volume than he usually needs, and he needs the volume to get there because he doesn't run.
On the other side, we have kind of a weird situation here. I'll just simply ask, is Brookshire going to get the reins? San Diego State kind of has a QB situation brewing. They're not a great team to target anyway. What do you make of this, though? I mean, how do you think they respond? They've got around a 28-point implied total.
Brookshire was supposed to start this year, but he got hurt really early on. Lucas Johnson took over the job and he played well enough just to not relinquish it back to Brookshire when healthy. But that wasn't the case last week against Boise State. Boise State got up to a lead, arguably should have won the game, but they pulled Johnson and put Brookshire back in, and he was the spark that got them the victory. He played really well in the game. The issue is we have a larger body of work with Brookshire of him not being an efficient quarterback. So I'm curious if that was the time away helped him, or if we're going to see regression back towards the Brookshire we've seen in the past. But the one thing that we can say about Brookshire is he's very mobile, and he displayed that last week. So he does offer an upgrade over Lucas Johnson. Utah State is not a good run defense. They're allowing over 170 yards per game. So it's not just Greg Bell that can exploit that matchup, but Brookshire can as well. I would not play Greg Bell and Brookshire in the same lineup because of the slowness of the offense and the low total in the game. But I think using one or the other makes sense. And Brookshire is actually a much better play on FanDuel, in my opinion, where he comes in with a cheaper price and the quarterbacks are tightly priced over there.
Do you worry about Bell's overall volume if this guy can vulture a little bit?
Yeah, Bell's volume isn't a concern either way. He's been ceding carries to Chance Bell, Keegan Williams, Jordan Bird on occasion, and he hasn't seen more than 17 carries in 3 straight games. And those have been competitive games. Like, they were down against Boise State and they needed to use their best players. Ultimately, it's a matchup-based contrarian play for Greg Bell, but there's certainly better plays.
And then last thing I want to ask you about is Jesse Matthews on the outside. He's just had 2 absolute monster games recently, but are those just kind of outliers, or is this something where we continue to buy late in the year?
Yeah, so he has 21 targets over the last 2 games. That's more than 1/3 of his targets in the season. When San Diego State plays with the lead, they just don't throw the ball. So it's an issue to me. I would not be playing him at 6.3, not even remotely a consideration for me. But if you think Utah State gets up in the game for whatever reason, they're 6-point underdogs, so I do not think that is the case, then you could maybe take a look. But he is very, very far down the board for me.
You bet this game?
I did not.
Neither did
Terrifies me. This is one of the most volatile games, I think, on the entire board.
How good? Where do you think this punter is going to get drafted?
I don't know. Who's the worst coach that would take him early?
Dan Campbell, number 1 pick. And they just set themselves up. They use a punter a lot, solidify the position for the next decade. Easy game.
That is true. They do use a punter a lot. Maybe
you see? Not that crazy
for them.
Good for San Diego State's punter. Not the best game again, 49.5-point total. All right, let's keep it going. Another game that's very, I'd say, under the radar. App State, Louisiana Lafayette, quality teams, not the best environment, 52.5-point total. App State's a slight favorite here. Talk to me about this team. We haven't seen a ton of them on slates week in and week out. How do you think they attack? What type of team are they? And are you getting a lot of the Mountaineers today?
I have a little bit. They're actually underpriced. They've just been blowing the hell out of their opponents recently. They've definitely played the easier half of their schedule down the stretch, and they play their tough games early on in the year. Their last competitive game was actually against Louisiana Lafayette, where they just got straight rolled by the Raging Cajuns. But overall, this App State team is going to be very run heavy. They're slightly above average in terms of pace. They're favored in this game. I think a lot of that could be recency bias. Nothing is really different between these teams outside of a couple healthier running backs for App State. But Chase Bryce, the Clemson, the Duke transfer, he's now with App State, somewhat mobile, but he takes a decent amount of sacks. And overall, he's averaging 242 pass yards per game. It's actually much more efficient than he's been in the past, but I think that's just the drop in competition. He did not play well against Louisiana Lafayette, arguably his worst game of the year. But because they've been blowing out teams so badly, you haven't seen a full run from their receivers, their runners. So Corey Sutton, he comes in pretty cheap at 4,900 compared to the role we've seen him play. If you just look at the last 4 games, which have largely been blowouts, he's averaging 5.8 targets per game in that span, but then 7.6 on the year. And obviously, if they're playing competitive games the whole way, you would expect that number to climb. So he's actually somebody I'm interested in. Malik Williams as well. Thomas Hennigan is the wide receiver 3, and for whatever reason, he's priced above Corey Sutton and Malik Williams, which is just a little weird, but I think you could get down to Sutton Williams just fine. The backfield's a disaster. We targeted this at times this year because of injuries, but now they have a healthy Nate Noel, Cameron Peoples. Daytrich Harrington is back from his season-ending injury we saw last year. And they even converted linebacker Anderson Castle to running back, and he's received a fair amount of carries. It's kind of a stay away in the backfield.
Yeah, this team really, you mentioned, they've been destroying. They've only given up 7 or fewer points in 3 straight games. Really have looked good. I don't know. This is a tough one to break down. Again, not a game that I'm betting. On the other side, Louisiana Lafayette, they lost their coach, but I believe he's on the sidelines today. You've got Levi Lewis, who is their quarterback. What do you expect from them against an App State defense? As you mentioned, they've looked fantastic in recent weeks against pretty bad competition.
I bet Louisiana Lafayette +3.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did way earlier. I don't know if we talked about this in the podcast. We forgot to, but I did bet it. Anyway,
okay.
The issue with this team for DFS outside of Levi Lewis, and he's a game manager, so he's not even the most attractive play to begin with. They run a rotation at every single position, and like a nasty one at that. You'll see 3 backs in Chris Smith, Montrell Johnson, and Amani Bailey. You'll see upwards of like 8 receivers get rotated in here. Their previous number 1, Peter LeBlanc, he hasn't seen more than 3 targets in 3 straight games, and his routes dipped below 30% last week. So he's just out of the question. The players actually running the most routes have been Errol Rogers and Jalen Williams, and even they're just right at 50%. Neither was targeted. Well, Errol had 5 targets, but outside of him, nobody was targeted more than 3 times in their last game. It's a complete disaster. I would not touch anybody on Louisiana Lafayette. And Levi Lewis, he's even hard to play, not only because of his game manager role, but who do you stack him with? I find that very difficult. And outside of just massive tournaments, I'm not getting a lot of this side of the game.
Yeah, well said. I mean, if I had to, it would still be LeBlanc, but I don't feel great about sub 4K. You're just hoping for one of those. But the game log tells the story this year. You guys got 1 touchdown. It's not a great situation. I'll root for Louisiana Lafayette. I always like them. I did not bet this, but you did. I think they are maybe the Bowling Green of this slate that we can just ignore. And it's not because they're not a good team. It's just, you mentioned the rotations at every position, and Levi Lewis is in a very crowded quarterback room.
I agree with you.
Yeah. All right. 4 down, 4 to go. Now it gets serious. Georgia, Bama, 48.5 point total. Georgia is a 6.5 point favorite. Can't remember doing a Georgia game where I didn't ask, well, are they just going to be up by so much that it's not going to matter? Do you think anything with Georgia changes if this game is competitive? And what I mean by that, does someone like Zamir White, get 20 carries for a change? Or is it just the way that Georgia plays that no matter what, by nature, they don't help us for DFS?
I think it will be slightly narrowed. This is one of the better GPP spots in the entire slate because we haven't seen Georgia in many competitive games this year. In very early in the season when they played like Clemson, that was a competitive game, but Georgia had so many injuries that we didn't really get a good look at their offense either. And JT Daniels started that game. He's not the quarterback anymore. It is Stetson Bennett. For tournaments, if Alabama keeps this close and the spread's only 6.5 points, suggesting they will, you could just see a full complement of snaps from the Georgia starters, which gives you a lot of tournament viability because we haven't seen it this year and people aren't going to play these guys. Stetson Bennett's mobile, which is good, certainly helps his floor. And then if they're above their 39.5% pass rate, you could see a ceiling for a guy who's been among the most efficient quarterbacks in the entire country. So I think Bennett's fine. The issue is stacking him. And the only player that I think is really going to see a clear role is Brock Bowers, their tight end. He's expensive at 6,700. A guy only averaging 3.8 targets on the year is hard to get in your lineup at 6,700, but I still think you could in contrarian spots. Outside of that, I really don't know how the snaps are going to shake out. We saw George Pickens return from injury, Dominic Blaylock return from injury. Neither of them had played at all this season. And I'm not expecting more than 25-30% of the routes for them because they're both coming off serious injuries. But even that much, it kind of just siphons away playing time from other starters like Adonai Mitchell, Jermaine Burton, Ladd McConkey, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. All these guys rotate in and out of the lineup. If I'm stacking outside of Bowers, it's probably Jermaine Burton because he's not hurt and he's been the wide receiver one at times in the past. The one position I think that could get a little more concentrated than receivers running back, and we've seen glimmers of this year. Zamir White will handle larger workloads in competitive games. The issue with White is he still will not catch passes. That role is designed specifically for James Cook. And now you are potentially seeing the return of Kendall Milton, who had a knee sprain and hasn't played in multiple weeks. It's still a little bit volatile, but I do have stacks of this game where I'm running Bryce Young with pass catchers and running Zamir White back on the other side. I do not have as much of the Stetson Bennett side, but I do think they're both interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so hard to tell what they're going to. I mean, just for reference, in the last 4 weeks, there is no player on Georgia who has had more than 6 targets in any game. There's just no volume to go around. Now, if the game gets competitive, obviously there could be more passing volume. I also think there's a very real scenario that Georgia just does what they do to everybody. And I'm not saying it's going to be 50-0, but I like Georgia in the game. I wouldn't be stunned to see this resemble, Auburn or Kentucky or one of those matchups where Georgia just wins. They win by 20 points and they do what they do to everybody, and it doesn't produce a ton of fantasy production. I do want to ask you about the other side. You mentioned that you are willing to get to this. Against Georgia's top end defense, you just still trust that potentially someone like Bryce Young and these pass catchers can be effective, or is there something that you think Bama can do to cause them problems?
Bryce Young is just a great player. He averages 325 passing yards per game, not mobile. But we've seen the ceiling as a passer in pretty tough matchups. Obviously, Georgia's going to be the toughest one. But just because of the fact that he's not going to be played much and he does have the ceiling, I'm willing to take shots in tournaments. It's just an ownership versus a ceiling type of thing. And I think it is worth the risk here with so much ownership coming in on not only Crum, but Pickett and Sam Hartman, who we haven't talked about yet. It's literally just an ownership play.
Anything in the backfield? I mean, I know that's a tough ask to think that you can run on this team. Is Robinson even going to play? If he doesn't play, does Trey Sanders get it all, or does it not even matter?
They are so thin at running back right now. They already lost Roydell Williams. They already lost McClellan. So Robinson, he practiced this week, but allegedly it was very limited. This is beat writer reports. I obviously wasn't there, but outside of Brian Robinson, it's Trey Sanders, and they had to move linebacker Demoy Kennedy over to the running back position. He's not even in the player pool. So, I mean, it would be, I would guess, essentially all Trey Sanders if Brian Robinson is out, and he's cheap. The issue is this game is not an early start time, so we will not have this information right away, but there's plenty of late backs where I think and we have 3 separate start times today, so you could leave some salary, rotate things around if you want. But I think Trey Sanders is a lot more palatable at his price compared to Robinson at his.
And I believe, and we talked about this, you can listen every week, including the bowl seasons, Betting You, our podcast. Just search that, find it on Spotify, anywhere you listen, or just the Awesemo Podcast Network. You're on the Georgia side with me, correct?
Yeah, I bet I'm at 6.5. I also think if you're running Bryce Young, you should certainly be stacking him. I like Mechie just because of price, but Williams certainly in play too. Mechie had the huge target game because Williams got ejected for targeting. These guys are basically neck and neck in targets, and Williams is used more downfield. Any
Slade Bolden in there?
I have like 2 lineups with Slade Bolden, and I almost considered Xing him out.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he's obviously, it's salary relief, so you're not paying 24-ish, 25-ish if you stack up the 3. But again, that's a contrarian, certainly not my preferred build. That's not, I want to go against that defense. I think the dogs kind of roll them finally, but 3 games left. Houston +10 against Cincinnati, 53-point total. Logic would say that if Cincinnati wins the game they're in, you never know. Regardless, they're going to be in for a real test, in my opinion. Talk to me about this Houston team. They're a team that they only have 1 loss, and it was the opening game of the year. They've got an experienced player in Clayton Tune. They've got really good players on the outside. I'm a big Singleton fan, as well as some of these other guys. What do you make of them? How do you think they try to move the ball against Cincinnati's defense?
I think they're going to try to run. Cincinnati has shown cracks, but they've all come against the run. We know about their studs, their pass rushers, their corners. They're very, very good players. But Houston, they should have won their opener too. They were up 14 points at halftime and just gave that game away. Looking at this game for DFS, obviously Houston's not going to be a huge priority because they're low implied team total. I'm more interested in them from a betting perspective. But Tune is mobile. He hasn't really shown it this year. He injured his hamstring in week 2 against Rice, and he hasn't really run since. I don't know if it's lingering or what it is. But Tune, he's a guy that requires passing volume now that he's not running. And I don't think we see quite as much against a very slow and run-heavy Cincinnati team. If you are using Tune, he's easy to stack. It's either Nathaniel Dell, their pure alpha, or you're going down and just punting with like a Singleton or a tight end in Trahan. I don't have a lot of interest in those players. Dell is really cheap on FanDuel. He was popping in some optimals. Just be careful with Dell. Tough matchup, poor game environment for him. I am willing to play him a little bit, but I don't think I want to play him in cash over there. If they are trying to exploit the run game, Cincinnati, where they have shown cracks, it's probably going to be with freshman Alton McCaskill, who has worked ahead of Tazon Henry, but it's kind of like a 60-40 split in this backfield. So it's still not a preferred play, but GPP viable.
Yeah, I mean, McCaskill, I don't want to read too much into it, but he had a couple major workloads. And then the last couple games, 9-9 with Henry and some of these other guys. Do you think that's just a product of maybe just like game flow, or is there maybe a low probability where he doesn't receive that type of workload anymore?
I think it's game flow, but it's hard to say.
We did get a little news, and again, nothing is confirmed, but it looks like some of these Northern Illinois guys are on the field warming up. Lombardi, Cole Tucker. I'm not surprised. I think they're going to, they've been kind of gearing up for this game specifically. They had that side locked up, and it doesn't matter. Golden flashes. Don't worry about it. We're going to be good. Anything else from Houston before we go to the other side?
No, I think we hit it all.
Desmond Ridder, guy gets it done. He's mobile. He can diffuse what I think is going to be a pretty tough pass rush to deal with. He is $9,000 though on DraftKings, and that of course is an opportunity cost $10,500. So he's in the crumb range on FanDuel. Simply put, where does he fall in the quarterback priority rankings for you today?
Great tournament play, but in low risk contest cash format, certainly behind the studs you just mentioned. But the bull case for Ridder is he's very mobile. He has not shown it all this year. He's on pace for a career low in rushing yards, largely because Cincinnati, early in the year, especially since they got slapped in the face by the playoff committee, Fickle kind of realized like, okay, I actually got to play these teams tough. But prior, he's just taking his foot off the gas, just like running, slamming Jerome Ford and these backups into the back of the offensive line. And that works against South Florida and Navy. But you're playing Houston here. So I am expecting a full workload for Desmond Ridder. If he is running a little bit more, he certainly has viability. They like to use him a lot in the red zone too. So there is scoring upside. And even going back to last year, we've seen him vulture countless touchdowns. Last year, he had 12 scores on the ground, and he could take that away from Ford. But either way, it's a tough matchup. Houston plays phenomenal defense across the board. You're hoping for a spike in volume for Ridder, and that's the case to play him in tournaments. He's gotten a little easier to stack. They have kind of solidified their pass catchers, but they still use 4 receivers and 2 tight ends, so it's still not even the most condensed situation. And Alec Pierce is in the same price range as like a Robertson, or a little bit cheaper than Thompkins. With low volume, Alec Pierce is still really hard for me to get to. So it's basically just naked Ridder or Jerome Ford in the backfield. Since he returned from injury, 19 carries in back-to-back games. He's never going to handle the Jaylen Warren workload, but he should see more efficient performances against these weaker opponents. Again, Houston, a little bit more difficult than the team Cincinnati's played this year.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about this. Jerome Ford, Abram Smith, Jaylen Warren, Cooper from Kent State. I know it's very hard and it's very crowded, but like, where does Ford go in rankings like that? Or would you try to take savings with like the Warren and the Cooper? Or do you think that Jerome Ford can hold his own maybe for cash?
Ford is third on that list for me.
Okay.
And I think he's an outside consideration for cash. I think you could play all of Cooper, Warren, and Ford, but you're not playing Addison if you do that. So what does your lineup look like? I would rather forego Ford and play Warren and Cooper.
You mentioned running Ridder alone. You mentioned Alec Pierce. I don't think there's a ton else to say. I do want to talk about the betting side quickly. I hope Cincinnati makes it. I'm rooting for them. I'm a pseudo fan. I think they have a very real chance to lose the game. I grabbed 10.5 early this week. I feel very good about that. To me, this is just a toss-up kind of game. So I am on Houston in the points.
I am not a Cincinnati fan. I do not think they deserve to be in the playoff, even if they win. Top 4 teams do not play Navy and USF in these teams to sing.
I agree. That's why Notre Dame should never get in the playoff ever, because Notre Dame only plays Navy. 11 Navies and 1 Cincinnati.
Notre Dame's strength of schedule is better than Cincinnati's, but I don't think they should be in the playoff either. Anyway, this is not a playoff show, so I'll talk about betting. I did take Houston plus 11.
Plus 11. Yeah, I think we're both on the same page there. We will see. I mean, Cincinnati's style points would help, but for a 53-point total, it's not the greatest. Again, we've got 2 ridiculous games and then a bunch of so-so games, which are going to have some tournament value, but the second of the ridiculous games is upon us. Pittsburgh, 3.5 point favorite versus Wake Forest, 71.5 point total. These are 2 teams that I would say the majority of Saturday morning shows we talk about. And when we talk about them, we talk about Kenny Pickett, who has just been phenomenal all year. I know you're a fan. I'm a fan. Addison on the outside is 9,300. So you've alluded to him a couple of times on this show. time to talk about him is right now. You're going to try to make room for him and plug him in even at that price?
He's in a 2v2 for cash games with me, and I don't know if I'm playing him yet. He's very cost prohibitive, and I think you can find similar volume across the way here with Roberson, but we'll talk about him in a second. I'll just say I may be playing him in cash. I've got 15 minutes to decide, so it's coming down to the wire. But anyway, the difference between this game and the Kent State Northern Illinois game is you have two teams that are just hell-bent on passing. In the previous game we talked about, those are run-first teams. So this is where you're going to see a ton of quarterback ownership. And I think the top three most owned quarterbacks clearly are going to be Crum, Pickett, and Hartman. But Pickett and Hartman are going to be stacked more just because both teams passing the ball a ton, and they both run over 80 plays per game. So when you're using Pickett to Addison, Pickett to Jared Wayne, be very careful with the rest of your lineup. You need to get contrarian in tournaments in some spot because there's going to be a lot of duplication today. But overall, Pickett is a phenomenal play. He's mobile. He averages 340 yards per game, throwing 39 attempts per game. And they played some teams where they've taken their foot off the gas. You could see as much as 45 attempts. Addison is one of the best receivers in the country, top three, averaging 112 yards, over 10 targets, 13.3 targets in the last 4 games. Taysier Mack's been hurt, so Jared Wayne has stepped up as the wide receiver 2. Very clearly the wide receiver 2 as well. Shockey Jacques-Louis, the 3 rotates on and off the field. He's viable, but Wayne just is a far more consistent role. And then Lucas Krull is their every down tight end. They use 12 personnel a lot, so you will see Gavin Bartholomew at times, but Krull is an every down player at 3,900. So expect all 3 of these pass catchers to be heavily owned.
There's no doubt that stacking Pickett with these guys at all price points is going to be effective. But the one glaring weakness, and Wake Forest defense is bad, but they're even worse against the run. Abicanada, Davis, they've got backs. How do you think that shakes down? And can we exploit Wake Forest on the ground, even though it's a somewhat crowded backfield?
I did play some of the runners, and Abanaconda missed their last game. Precautionary, they were locked into this. They didn't need to play him. And we actually have seen Rodney Hammond be very successful carrying the ball. He has at least 15 carries in 3 of the last 4 games, but Hammond does not catch the ball. They use Abanaconda as the pass catcher, and he has more carries than Hammond on the year, some of that due to injury. But I would rather play Abanaconda overall, and I do have some lineups with him. With that said, also a little bit of Hammond, and it's just leverage off the Pitt stack. Those lineups that have Abanaconda and Hammond are on the other side of Hartman stacks, just for your reference.
Is it possible, because we're going to talk about Wake Forest in 1 second, but Hartman's going to be a point of discussion. I mentioned in a couple other games, mega stack. Can you do a mega stack with Pickett and Hartman together?
Yes, 100%. You're punting at running back, but yes, you can.
Okay. Hartman, A.T. Perry, Roberson. I mean, what's there to say? I assume that's how you want to attack Pittsburgh, stack them up. I mean, what do you do with a Wake Forest team that plays hyper fast and is just an electric offense all year?
Yeah, you said it well. Hartman is mobile too. He's a little more mobile than Pickett, so you've got a very solid floor there. A.T. Perry and Roberson have the same volume. It's edged a little bit towards Perry because Roberson left a game early. Otherwise, I actually think you'd see Roberson leading the team in targets. So I think Roberson is underpriced compared to Perry, and that's why he's such a good value play here. But ultimately, they're both extremely good plays, both of them over 1,000 yards on the year. I think you can stack up Hartman with either of them. Taylor Morin had been the wide receiver 3 over the course of the year, but recently they've been using him in a 50-50 split with Donald Stewart, who's been a little more efficient, and he's actually out-targeted Morin in each of the last 2 games. So Stewart is a nice punt play at 3,600, cash viable. He's seen at least 4 targets in 4 straight games.
Yeah, we had a couple people ask, Kickstart, good guy, other people asking about value. Is there obvious value, or are you just really dipping into the mid 3s at wide receiver and looking for the Stewarts of the world, guys that are attached to really prominent offenses?
Best value plays are Stewart for Wake Forest, Krull for Pitt, and we'll talk about Keegan Williams for Iowa. He's a little more volatile, but then the Kent State receivers we already mentioned.
Tough game. I do think that ultimately Pittsburgh, particularly on the ground, is going to be the difference in the betting market. I don't like it at 3.5 a ton. It's such a big total. It probably doesn't matter. I got this at a better number. It's the Pittsburgh side for me. I think they do win the ACC tonight.
Agreed.
Anything else here? Clearly, I think we both agree one of the best games, and that's obvious with a 71.5 point total.
Yep, 100% agree.
Final game, Michigan, 11-point favorites. They control their own destiny. They win, they're in against Iowa. 40. There's nothing more fitting than to close the season with Iowa. 43-point total. Like, of course, they're the last team we have to talk about. Michigan, they got it done. They were able to do what we both kind of thought was possible, control it on the ground. And Haskins was absolutely phenomenal. He had 28 carries in that game. What do you see here? Is it his backfield once again? He's 8,700, 9,500, a little pricier than the Warrens and the Fords of the world. What do you do with Haskins today?
Haskins is priced as if Blake Corum's not playing. So this is a little bit concerning to me because Corum is going to be active. We just don't know how healthy he is. So you have the chance that Haskins handles the workload we've seen in recent weeks, but you also have the chance that he's back to just 20 carries if Blake Corum is even remotely healthy compared to what we saw last week, where he only carried the ball 6 times. So Haskins is really risky on a slate that has a lot of players we want to play in expensive price ranges. For me, he just is kind of on the outside looking in because of the alternatives.
Cade McNamara, was impressive. He made the throws when he needed to, but it doesn't scream, enough volume for the DFS side. What do you do with the passing game here? Is there anything to look to, or do we say, they are double-digit favorites. They have a clear identity. I'm not going to go to a team that's just very, very dispersed on the outside.
That is the case. I'm not interested in McNamara. DraftKings did a great job pricing Cornelius Johnson. I want to just X him out, but we're talking about an alpha receiver at 4,500. Again, he's like Tyquan Thornton and these receivers that are extremely game script dependent. They basically need to be pushed in order for Cornelius Johnson to even play to his average amount of targets, which is just 5.2 per game. So I still don't have a lot of him, but DraftKings did a great job pricing him. I at least turned my head.
On the other side, you've got an Iowa team that, I don't know, they're winning games by like 5 points against the Northwesterns of the world. I haven't been remotely impressed with them all year. Petrus has a -7.5 rushing yards prop over on PrizePicks. He might even be around, though, to see all the game because Padilla has been in there a little. What do you make of Iowa? Can we get to anything in the pass catchers? I know you mentioned maybe they've got some value emerging, but talk to me about this team against a very tough Michigan defense.
You're not playing a quarterback, but Keegan Johnson is really cheap on DraftKings. He's a player that has now averaged 6.8 targets per game over the last 4. So he's extremely involved in the offense. He's clearly their top pass catcher. The question is, would you prefer him over a Krull or a Donald Stewart? And the difference to me is maybe he has slightly better volume, but at the end of the day, the scoring expectation for Iowa is so low that that's enough for me to try to play Krull or Stewart or a Kent State receiver. In the run game, Tyler Goodson is really cheap on FanDuel. He's a little expensive on DraftKings. He does catch the ball, which is a benefit on both platforms, honestly. But FanDuel did a great job pricing running backs. I think if you need salary savings, he's purely a volume-based play over there. And I still don't even love it. I made sure to have purposefully limit the exposure I was getting to him over there because it was a little more than I liked.
In terms of Keegan Johnson, I assume that everything that if you had interest in Laporta, you would just play Keegan Johnson.
Yes, 100%. Okay. Not even close.
And there's really nothing else to say about Iowa because you can't play a quarterback. Goodson, running back's pretty saturated. I mean, you can't, even in tournaments, I don't think you could play a quarterback.
Nope. No. We didn't talk about Blake Corum. If he's even close to the role he saw early in the year, he's a supreme value at 4,300. If you project him even at 50% of the role he saw early in the year, he still pops in some optimals. Going to be heavily weighted towards tournaments, but I mean, 4,600 or 4,300. Blake Corum's been better than Haskins all year long, and it hasn't been close. He's been more efficient. He's just dealing with the foot injury, but he now warmed up 2 weeks ago, didn't play. Saw 6 carries last week in a game where they didn't blow out Ohio State, but they led comfortably throughout the game. So they did not need to use a lot of Corum. They could use Haskins, their big grinder back. If Corum is involved, and Corum's also the pass catcher, so there's that as well. The issue is they're just heavy favorites over Iowa. So how much do they need to use Corum to begin with? He's very volatile, but I do have a decent amount of Corum in tournaments.
And you have absolutely no room for a guy like Donovan Edwards, who's really not getting much right now.
If Corum comes back, Donovan Edwards is purely a pass catcher, and Corum plays that role if he's healthy. So that's worrisome to me.
Got about 7 minutes left here. If you guys have questions, we're going to take you up to lock. see if any crazy news breaks. There was a couple. We had a DK Cash question. Addison and Stewart versus Thompson and Bell.
I prefer the Addison side.
Yeah, I would too. If you can get the money for Addison, it's going to be pretty dangerous. There is possibly some overlay out there. As our friend
it out right now. Yeah, a couple thousand entries.
Okay.
Still in most of these contests. 5 minutes to lock, so he's on it.
We got
holy smoke, some of the satellites not full.
Not full. We got Corum and Addison or Cephas and Roberson for GPP.
Corum.
On DraftKings, the Corum side.
Yeah, Corum's a great GPP play, but if you play him, be okay with taking a 0. Like, you have to know that going in. If you want to play it safe or it's a small field, I would not play Corum. But if you're willing to take a risk, I think it's okay.
But clearly, in that vein, then he's not coming anywhere near your cash lineups. Man, you like to live dangerously. I thought that was going to be
the thing is you can pivot. He's in the night game. Like, you can pivot.
Yeah, that's what they all say. Yeah, you think you're going to pivot, and then you wake up hungover and you've already bet Syracuse woman. You know how it goes. It's a dangerous game.
Listen, man, Wisconsin's playing Marquette at 11 in basketball, and my good buddy is having his graduation party at the bar.
Yeah, you're not going to be
ready for late swaps at 6 p.m.
No. JD Eddie, yeah, PrizePicks has 25% boost today. Absolutely, they do. It is a great time to get over there. How will you guys feel when Dabo was named head coach here in Norman? I'll feel just fine because then I'll never bet Oklahoma again.
It's disgusting.
If you had to pick, I mean, these are two of you mentioned. I couldn't agree more. Crum, Hartman, and Pickett are clearly the top end quarterbacks. Splitting hairs, but if you had to take one, Hartman or Pickett?
Pickett.
We didn't really talk about him. I know it was the first game. And I think we would both agree that Jalen Warren is how they're going to attack Baylor. But what do you make of Spencer Sanders? Clearly, he's more of a tournament play. But do you think he could have a role on a team like that, or do you think it's just not the best situation?
Yeah, I think he's fine. He runs the ball a lot. He could have a ceiling on the ground himself. So he's viable for that reason, in my opinion. I do have some stacks with him, usually with Bray and Green. I didn't play any Tay Martin, but on the other side, I'm running Abram Smith.
We had a question. Pick two of these three guys. We've got Goodson, Ebner, or Noel.
I'll get rid of Noel. So Ebner and Goodson.
I definitely keep Ebner. It's pretty close for me. I think I would also get rid of Noel. It just pains me to ever give Iowa's offense any credit in anything.
I agree. It's very hard. It was very hard for me seeing Tyler Goodson's name come up on FanDuel. It's
a tough scene. You know, today you mentioned a decent amount of value, particularly with some of these guys like Stewart and Johnson possibly. Do you see any running back value, or is that where someone like Corum comes in and it's just not secure?
I think Corum and the pit backs, those are the main ones. If you want to get really, really weird, you could play like the pass catching back for Northern Illinois, which is Ratkovich, but I don't love that.
Yeah, that seems. Then again, it's a great game environment, but yeah, that is a little dicey. We got an Ebner Bailey or Tyler Jr. on DK last spot.
Okay, what is it again? Ebner. Who is Bailey? Use first names. It's like just hard for my mind to like gather all these names.
It's Bailey, the running back, Imani Bailey from Louisiana Lafayette. Okay. I'm thinking David Bailey. Who? Ebner. No, it's just one of these three: Ebner, Bailey, or Utah State's back, Tyler.
Give me Tyler.
Ooh,
Tyler. I
thought you were going to say
most
Ebner.
Consistent workload. Ebner, it's close between those two, but certainly not Bailey.
Okay. No, I mean that's one of the reasons. Well, again, I think the way I'm logically thinking about the slate in that regard is you've got those backs saturated in that 6 to 7K range on DraftKings, the Cooper all the way up to the Ford. If you're going off that, I would call it kind of a pivot. That's where everyone is. You've got Haskins above. You've got guys like Corum below. And some of these lesser known games like Louisiana Lafayette. So that's how I approach it. We talked about this again on Betting You, but if you want to throw out one bet, is there one game that you're confident in a little over the others?
My favorite bet is Pitt -3.
I'm close to saying that as well. I think Houston for me, particularly if you can get over 10. I really trust that team. Hope I'm wrong, but it's just business
too, man.
Just business, my man. And I do want to say real quick, we've only got a couple minutes left. you're not going to want to go anywhere. After this, NFL tournament takes, two of the best that we have, Greg Ehrenberg, Neil Orfield, talking everything you guys need to know for Sunday. There's a million games tomorrow, of course. They're going to have you covered with some really good tournament strategy. That is coming up right after the hour. So you throw on the Kent State game, you kick back, and you listen to that as well. Anything else here before we duck on out, Matt? Are your lineups secured? I know you had 15 minutes to make some very crucial decisions.
I did. I decided. Don't forget the USC Cal nightcap. Make sure to get your Jackson Dart stacks in on.
No, forget it. I'm actively telling people to forget that.
They have a showdown slate, so you can't.
Yeah, that's what you want to do. Lincoln Riley and co. Anything else is what we got next week? Army, Navy?
Oh, yeah. The Armed Forces Bowl. Honestly, probably a top 3 game of the year for me. I love the Armed Forces Bowl. But before we go, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's watched all season. And even if you're tuning in today for the first time, appreciate being able to do this for you guys. So thank you very much for your support. It means a lot.
No doubt about it. Well said. And look, we're not going to be going anywhere. The bowl season will be upon us. You may not see us as often, but that's why you want to subscribe, check the schedule. Certainly all Matt's great content is still going to be up. This guy obviously will provide that. So you want to get inside the ropes, but you'll be seeing plenty of us. And then in college basketball, last thing I want to say, if you have questions or you want our picks, get in our Discord. Matt is finally in there doing some great things. Hot fire, dropping picks. And if you've got questions, of course, at JazzRazDFS, at Matt_Gajeski. Handles are on the screen, but I just want to echo, got to go out like this. Thank you, guys. It's been an awesome show all year. We've had a blast doing it. We're going to keep building it here at Awesemo. And thanks to Tyler, who secretly behind the glass the entire year with us. It was a great, great trio, and we had a great time doing it. So hit that like button on the way out. Enjoy and good luck, my friends. Hope someone takes something down big. We'll talk to you guys soon enough with more college football here from Awesemo.